Welcome to the Brooklyn College CUNYfirst video training series, How to Create a Travel Authorization in CUNYfirst. Please note that Mozilla Firefox is the recommended browser for using CUNYfirst. Before creating a travel authorization, please review the Travel Procedure Summary. Scan all related paperwork, a completed Authorization to Travel Form, trip itineraries, conference registrations, airline and or hotel reservations, etc., as they will need to be uploaded into CUNYfirst. Retain all original paperwork, as it will need to be submitted to the Office of Accounts Payable. Please note that out-of-town travel or use of a CUNY Travel Card requires an approved travel authorization in CUNYfirst prior to the first travel date. Self-approval of a travel authorization is not permitted. Travel authorizations must be approved by the supervisor of the traveler, as well as the department approver or approvers. The department approver or approvers ensure department budget is encumbered or set aside for the anticipated travel. Separate travel authorizations are required when a trip is being paid for by more than one institution. Log in to CUNYfirst. Navigate to Financial Supply Chain, Employee Self-Service, Travel and Expense Center, Travel Authorization, Create. If submitting a travel authorization as a proxy, select the employee ID of the traveling faculty or staff member using the Search tool. Click the magnifying glass icon and click on the employee ID of the traveling faculty or staff member. Click the Add button. In the General Information section, values must be entered in the following fields: description, comment, business purpose, default location, date from, and date to. For the description, enter a brief description of no more than 30 characters to identify the trip. For this travel authorization, we entered Adobe Bootcamp. For the comment, enter the purpose of the trip. For this travel authorization, we entered in-depth training for Adobe desktop applications. For the business purpose, select the business purpose of the trip from the drop-down list. For this travel authorization, we selected Conference. For the default location, enter the destination for the trip. To look up the default location, click the magnifying glass icon. On the next screen, click Advanced Lookup. Select Contains from the drop-down menu, enter the destination, and click the yellow Lookup button. We entered Orlando. Locate the destination in the resulting list below and click on the expense location. For the date from, enter the departure date by clicking on the calendar icon. Please note that all travel authorizations must be future dated. For the date to, enter the return date by clicking on the calendar icon. Click the Accounting Defaults link to view or adjust the chart field string to be applied to each expense line of the travel authorization. For each expense line, complete the expense type, date, amount, payment type, and billing type fields. Please note that each meal must be entered on a separate expense line. For the expense type, select the expense type from the drop-down list. If the employee is a member of the PSC, only PSC expense types may be selected. The first expense is the conference registration fee. For the date, enter the date the expense is expected to be incurred by clicking on the calendar icon. For the amount, enter the total expected expenditure without a dollar sign. For the payment type and billing type, select the same value for each drop-down list. Choose from the following options. Select CUNY Card when expenses will be charged to a CUNY-issued travel card. Select Employee Paid when the employee will use their own funds and be reimbursed following travel. Select Non-Reimbursable when the expense is the responsibility of the employee. In this example, we will use a CUNY card. Click the detail link located to the right of the expense line to display the authorization detail page for the expense type. The fields that must be completed will vary depending on the expense type selected. For the conference, enter a brief description. To modify the accounting values for an individual expense line, click the Accounting Details link. In the Accounting Defaults section, the GL unit and department chart fields may be modified as necessary. Click OK to return to the previous screen. Click Return to Travel Authorization Entry. Next, we will enter an expense line for transportation. We will be traveling by plane. Enter the date the expense is expected to be incurred by clicking on the calendar icon. Enter the total expected expenditure without a dollar sign. In most cases, employees pay for transportation and are reimbursed, so we will select Employee Paid for the payment type and billing type. For the details, enter the ticket number and a brief description and click Return to Travel Authorization entry. Next, we will enter an expense line for lodging. Enter the date the expense is expected to be incurred by clicking on the calendar icon. For lodging, select the check-in date. In the case of lodging, the expenditure is calculated automatically based on the values entered on the detail page. In most cases, employees pay for lodging and are reimbursed, so we will select Employee Paid for the payment type and billing type. For the details, enter the number of nights, a brief description, and the nightly rate, and click Return to Travel Authorization entry. Next, we will enter an expense line for a meal. In this example, breakfast is provided at the conference. Please note that each meal must be entered on a separate expense line. Enter the date the expense is expected to be incurred by clicking on the calendar icon. In most cases, employees pay for meals and are reimbursed, so we will select Employee Paid for the payment type and billing type. For the details, enter a brief description and click Return to Travel Authorization entry. Because each meal must be entered on a separate line, we will enter a second expense line for a meal. Additional expense lines can be created by copying from existing expense lines. Select the checkboxes next to the expense lines to be copied and click the Copy Selected button. On the Copy Selected Expenses page, select either Copy to one date or Copy to a range of dates and enter the date or dates the expenses are expected to be incurred by clicking on the calendar icon. In this example, we selected Copy to one date. Click OK to return to the Travel Authorization entry page. Be sure to utilize the Check for Errors button before copying expense lines, as expense lines that have errors or have not been checked for errors will trigger a warning message. Once all of the expenses have been entered, any related paperwork, a completed Authorization to Travel Form, trip itineraries, conference registrations, airline and/or hotel reservations will be attached. Click the Attachments link in the General Information section near the top of the page. Click the Add Attachment button, select Choose File from the pop-up menu, and then find the files that were scanned and saved earlier. Select the file, and then click Upload. When the upload is complete, click the yellow OK button. Repeat the process for each additional attachment. To validate the data, click the Check for Errors button. If there are errors, the missing or invalid information icon will be displayed on each line that contains an error. Click the missing or invalid information icon to view the associated expense line. The expense detail page will be displayed along with an explanation of the errors for each expense line. Correct each error as indicated. Please note that when the Check for Errors, Save for Later, or Submit buttons are clicked, CUNYfirst identifies any missing required fields and checks chart field strings to ensure that the chart field combination is valid. This completes the travel authorization entry process. Click Submit and then click OK on the following page to begin the approval process, or click Save for Later to save the travel authorization and come back to it later. In either case, all expense lines will be checked for errors. The travel authorization cannot be saved or submitted until all errors have been corrected. Once the travel authorization has been saved, the browser window may be closed.